He said, look, honey, sweetheart. These are our special moments that we have together. They are about love. I want to tell you something. Do you remember in your classes, she's 6 or 7 years old, have you seen pictures of the pyramids, one of the 7 wonders of the world? Yes, Daddy. Well, that's the glory of ancient Egypt. And have you ever seen pictures from ancient Greece as well? Of like the Parthenon and all this kind of thing? I don't know if she'd seen that or not. Maybe she had. He said, well, in the royal courts of those ancient, wondrous societies, fathers and children had special times just like you and I do. The kings, the pharaohs, the monarchs and the princesses, they got together like this. And what's happened is that the world has gotten away from these wonderful, loving connections. And people don't understand, and they're frightened by what they don't know. So if you talk about it, they're going to be confused and scared by it. But I'm telling you, honey, this is why the pyramids are there, and why the great achievements of ancient Greece took place, is because of these wonderful communion moments. He's talking about sexuality. And the world is coming back to that, honey. And in fact, you and I are forerunners of a new age where everyone will start doing this again, and it will be a glorious renewal of all civilization. But in the meantime, sweetheart, don't talk about this to anybody, okay? Would you just keep it quiet, keep your lips sealed? Okay, Daddy, I promise I will. She was 6 years old. The sex abuse went on for 7 more years as a result, harming her incalculably more deeply than it had already in the first 5 years or so of it, 4 or 5 years of it going on. And finally it stopped when he was discovered by an independent relative anally raping my patient's younger brother. Okay? He was a real case and a half, this guy. Well, I worked with this patient for 35 years. Okay, I met her when she was maybe 21 or something. And I worked with her for a very long time. And I went to her wedding. And I met her father, and I came to know him pretty well. And then once upon a time, about 15 years down into her marriage, the bottom fell out of her finances with her husband. There was no more sex abuse after age 13. But she carried the trauma from it just massively. She'd been psychotic repeatedly and had all kinds of things. It was deeply related to what had happened to her. But she was doing a lot better anyway. But she went broke and was in danger of going homeless. And I thought I would tell you what happened between me and the father. This is my problem is I don't have deep clinical experience with pedophiles, but I have momentary contacts with them that have really thrown me. I thought I would just share one with you. So anyway, she's going broke. She's got 2 children. She's got a whacked out husband who's a total alcoholic. And she's in danger of losing her home and having to go on the streets. The father, on the other hand, was still a working gentleman involved in his career as an engineer, making a huge amount of money, $140,000 a year or something. So I decided I'd just call him up. God damn it, enough is enough. Give your daughter some money. But I was trying to be nice about it. So I called him up and I said, hello, Mr. So-and-so, Mr. Smith.
Yes.
This is George Atwood. Oh, it's you. He knew my name. I'm the guy who worked with his daughter and so on. He's a little intimidated by me because he knows I know the whole story. He says, yes, what do you want, Dr. Atwood? I said, well, I just wanted to talk to you about your daughter Marie's whole situation.
What's that?
He said, well, you may or may not know, but the bottom has fallen out for her financially. And she's got 2 kids. I know you know them. I heard all about the grandfather and the children. By the way, her children were carefully protected from him, so he wouldn't get near them and be able to do anything. But I wasn't talking about that. And I said, well, she could really use some financial help. And I'm calling about that to see if some family resources, including from you, can be brought to bear on a desperate situation. Because they don't have enough money for food and their rent is going out. And what's going to happen to them? So could you help them? I just came out real directly about that. And then there was silence for about 20 seconds on the line. And then he said, are you saying I should help her? I said, well, after all that's happened, and I was referring generally, vaguely, to the sex abuse that's taken place. He knows I know about it. He knows I know about it. After all that's happened and all that took place in your family early and all, I thought you might want to do what you could for her. because she certainly needs the help, and you're in a position to be able to help her. And he said, "Excuse me, Dr. Atwood, I should help her?" And starts yelling at me. "I should help her? After that whole," I'm quoting him, "after that whole sordid business," these are his exact words, "that she put me through, I should help her? Excuse me, Dr. Atwood?" The sordid business was the fact that she had testified against him in court when she was 13 years old. Because that's what had happened. And legal arrangements had been made so children, custody was removed from the family, and protections were put in place, and he couldn't be around the children anymore without somebody being a chaperone and so on like that. But what he was referring to, that whole sordid business, was not his sexual abuse of her. It was her incomprehensible having turned on him and said he did something terrible to her. That's what he's talking about. He got him in so much trouble with the courts and almost put him in jail, but he managed to escape prison time because the family needed him to support them. And when I got off the phone with him that day, I felt like I was insane. I was saying, I thought you could, after what happened and the damage that was done and so on, wouldn't it be good if you could maybe help her out? He says, "I should help her, that sordid business." I felt like my brain was scrambled. Have you ever talked to somebody, where you think you're making sense, and they react in such a way that it just twists your brain in about 14 different ways. It cuts your corpus callosum, knocks off the brain stem, cancels the frontal lobes, all this. That's what I felt like. But it was useful. I didn't get any money out of him. She found another way. She doubled up on her dope selling operations that she was doing, cultivating giant gardens of marijuana and so on, selling those. That's fine. I was worried the cops would get her, but it should all be legalized anyway, so I wasn't worried about that. I was worried about the cops getting her. They never did. But it actually turned out to be helpful, because I realized, no wonder she went crazy. I almost went crazy after a 20-minute conversation with the guy. I almost went right out of my mind. I felt like going to a bridge and jumping off and throwing myself into the water. He played with reality there. But to him, now looking back on it, he's a classic pedophile. He was a gentle, loving pedophile. "Hi, honey, it's our special time again. It's our time." He would come in there in the middle of the nines of penis and all this da-da-da-da-da-da. All oral, never raped her vaginally at all or anything like that. As far as he was concerned, he had given nothing but his love to his daughter, and a love of a very special kind that had a role in the royal courts of ancient Egypt and ancient Greece and perhaps ancient China, and who knows what other great civilizations were based on. See, it all sounds really wacky, doesn't it? But to him, it was a part of the framework. That's what it is. So the image of monarchs, kings and queens and children all unifying with each other, what is that about? Well, that's the fantasy that expresses what it does for him. It takes him into a place that made him feel good about being alive, and being a person, and being a father, and being connected to something above and beyond just his own little life. So I'm not sure what all it was, but there you have it. I've known other pedophiles and so on and talked to them and whatever, but it's always sort of incidental. It's always secondary to working with their victims instead. So let me tell you my little fragmentary theory, such as it is, of what causes this. And I turn to the case of Michael Jackson to help me see this, and I think it may apply, though, quite broadly. And I want to ask you guys on Cool Questions of the Week what you think it might be. And don't, when you come to my question when I post it, don't come to, well, how would I know? I haven't done all the research on that. If you do all the research on it, you're going to find there's nothing there. So your private opinion might be as good as anything that anybody's ever said. Okay, but I'm going to tell you a thought or two that's come to me about it. Michael Jackson. The degree, the extent, the details of his molesting of children are not really known. But there are strong signs that at least in 2 instances, he took 2 young children, not how young, I don't know, 9, 10, 11 years old, in Neverland. You guys know what Neverland is? It's this special kind of ranch or something that was built on the model of Peter Pan, and it was kind of a paradise world for children. And then children would come there and stay with him and sometimes sleep with them, even in his own bed. And he got sexual with a couple of them a few times, or maybe more than a few times. Probably, we know about it publicly because lawsuits were brought against him. There were 2 lawsuits Both lawsuits were settled out of court for millions of dollars. So that's a sign something happened, okay? And he was able to kind of quash the whole thing by pouring money upon it. But my sense of Michael Jackson's sexuality with children is that it was very gentle, very sweet, probably very touchy-feely, a little orality or so on. No violent rape, no aggressive sadism, nothing like that at all. But there was something driving him to connect with children, including sexually. I think he fits into the framework of the elements that are here, what it is. What do we know about Michael Jackson's background? We know this. He was a man whose childhood was stolen from him. When he was a little boy, what happened? He didn't get to have a childhood. He was immediately taken into the Jackson Five, a singing group, a musical group. And he's very similar to Patty Duke in that way. Like a person whose early years were consumed by the entertainment industry, by the demands of performance. And as a result, not having a childhood, that leaves you with a giant void inside your being that you need to somehow fill. So I see Michael Jackson's attraction to children and his building of Neverland and the sexuality of his wonderful little communions with them, which were not so wonderful for those children maybe, but in his mind were wonderful things, as attempts to kind of revive a lost childhood that never even got to happen in the first place very well. I wonder if the same thing is true of Jerry Sandusky. There's an autobiography he wrote. It has a title like Touching. Touched or Touching or something touching. It's kind of weird, isn't it? He'd write a book about his own life, and it's called Touching, when he touches children all over the place and does more than goes beyond just that. I haven't read it. I've read some selections from it on Amazon. You know how you can get on Amazon and pull up a few lines and so on, all this. It's zero insight. You're not going to find anything in there telling what happened to him. But it would be interesting to me. If I had more time, I would give time to reading it and looking between the lines. His description of his parents and his family and so on. I had wonderful parents. They loved me. They stood up for me. They were just the greatest parents in the world. Oh, yeah? What was your catastrophe? There's no sign of it there. But there was a catastrophe. There has to be. How could there not be? There has to be. So what was it? Sometimes they can be hidden things. And I look at Jerry Sandusky's face a lot. The affect on his face, the emotional patterns and so on. I don't know what you'll think of this. This is pure speculation. But I see him as somebody who had to conform and comply into his own family and into the agendas and values and principles that his parents tried to teach him, and surrendering his very soul from a very young age to such an extent that it created a kind of counterpart to Michael Jackson's losing his childhood. It's like an attempt to reclaim one's true self back again that becomes highly sexualized and involves other children. And it's an example of a general principle that the things that we call symptoms in this field, you know, the strange behaviors, the awful experiences people have, the things that they show us so often, if you look at them deeply, they turn out to be the way the person is trying to fix all that has gone wrong, the way to restore what has been shattered, the way to resurrect what has been killed. And so I see Jerry Sandusky like that too. He's a man whose childhood, I think, was killed. But one would have to read between the lines of his own autobiography to understand how the homicide, if it could be called a homicide, was conducted. But then his sexual abuse pattern would be his effort to resurrect the thing, to pull it back together again. So that's the kind of direction I go in the whole thing. But I'm going to ask you guys to think about it. Okay, stop there today. Goodbye.